Okay, Mike W. writes, "Hey, I'm just starting to get more serious about game development after playing around with it for a few years. At times I feel great and things seem to progress quickly, but then I hit patches where I am completely stuck and lost." Yeah, that does happen. "Because of this, I'm beginning to think making a game is just too hard to pursue on my own. Do you have any advice?" Yeah, one, on my own jumps out. I mean, doing anything on your own is hard, especially when it's this type of creative pursuit. You're not going to know how to do everything. You can't. Like, no one is capable of being amazing at coding and being amazing at designing the programming structure of a game, or being great at art and great at the music and great at the marketing. Like, no one, or very few people are going to be really superb at every aspect of game development. So if you're trying to do it by yourself without much help or any help from other people, you're gonna have a tough time. It's a tough road to hoe. But we know this, right? We know game development is hard. Some people are surprised when they start, dipping their toes into game development, especially if they played games a lot. There's probably this feeling of, well, I've played video games for a large part of my life, and I've played video games since the NES. That was my first console that I can remember, and I had Game Boy and Sega Genesis and N64, and I've played a lot of games. There's benefit to that, but it doesn't necessarily translate to I know how to make a game. So I think a lot of people get stuck on that, and then they jump into an engine, or try to make something, or replicate. That's the real danger. You try to replicate a game that you really enjoy, thinking it can't be that hard. Let's do it. Let's try it. Let's see what I can do. And then you realize, like, yeah, it's pretty hard. So we accept that game development is hard, right? But you still want to do it alone. Maybe you have to go alone because you don't have those resources, you don't have those connections. Maybe you don't have the time to devote to building a team, and you just want to make a game as a hobby. Maybe you sell it, maybe you don't. How can you make it easier on yourself? One, I think there's a recognition that you can't do everything. And so you're going to have to pick and choose. You have to pick, what aspects am I going to focus on? What aspects am I good at? Where can I give a little bit of a balance to my workload to get the best product, the best game that I can make? And maybe you're really great at art. If that's your forte, then that really ought to be your main focus of the game. Have the game focus on your strengths. Don't try to make a game that's really heavily focused on art design if you really suck at art, because what are you going to do? You can't learn art at the same time as you're learning everything else. That takes years of practice, or a really sort of innate skill that makes you, learn faster. So pick and choose what your focus is and really know where your strengths are. Now, for the parts where you're not so great or you're really, really bad at, either you need to downplay how those are interacting in your game. If the artwork is not your skill, find an art design that takes a little bit less artwork, a little bit more minimalistic in terms of how many assets you need to produce, or the type of art style. Be smart about those choices so you're not just setting yourself up for a headache and a nightmare later on. If you still want those things to be a part of your game, then be really smart about how you interact and get others to help you. You may not need someone to be a part of the team. You may only need someone to do a little bit of the artwork. Maybe it's design the main character and you can take it the rest of the way. It's all about knowing what are the main focuses, what's the selling point of what I'm trying to do, what's the main point of the game. The other thing that you need to think about is your expectation level of what you're trying to produce is probably not going to be where you want it to be, just based on the fact that you're doing it by yourself. You have this grand idea that you're going to make, the next Minecraft or World of Warcraft or any other craft games. Again, you're setting yourself up for disappointment and headache, and you're going to get maybe a little bit of the way through, and you're going to quit because it's too much. It's too much. You can't do everything of that scale by yourself. And so you need to scale down your expectations of what you're trying to build. It may be that you make a really, really small game to start and work through that process of, designing the game, building the game, testing the game, marketing the game, getting the game out there so people can play it, and doing it on a much smaller scale so you can really fine tune those items and you're not overwhelmed with, recreating thousands of assets or writing a 30-hour story or creating this giant multiplayer setup. You don't need to do that on your first go. Think of something that can be scaled down, and it doesn't even have to be like make a really tiny puzzle game or, make a basic 2D platformer. You can still make a third-person action adventure game, but reduce the scale down. Make it be 5 hours long. It doesn't need to have 40 hours of content. You're not a AAA studio. It's not going to happen. It's unrealistic. You look at the games that are out there and marketed and played and sold and making tons and tons of money. Those AAA titles, they have so many people that are working on those games for an extended period of time and really overworked, as we know from a lot of the stories. You're not going to recreate that with one person. It's just not going to happen. The difficulty of game development, as with most things, is going to scale depending on what you're trying to achieve. So keep those expectations in scope. Keep that in mind when you're working. Game development is hard, but that's okay. Like, stuff doesn't have to be easy. Sometimes the hard stuff in life are the most rewarding when you do it, and that's kind of the challenge and the fun. So even if you don't get it right away, that's okay. Lots of other people didn't get it the first or second or third time either, and they're making games and doing lots of stuff that you want to do. So don't get discouraged by the difficulty. Just try to adjust your difficulty until you get a little bit more confident and then up it.